My family banned me from the company's annual business dinner, the same business I helped build. They didn't know I secretly owned most of it. When my father, Douglas, told me I wasn't invited this year, I thought he was joking. I laughed a little and asked if he was serious. He didn't even look up from his papers. He just said, "It's a partner-only dinner, Elena. You don't need to be there." My brother Mark was standing nearby, smirking like he'd been waiting for that moment. I felt my stomach twist, but I stayed quiet. I'd worked at Carver Engineering since I was 19. I gave that company my 20s, my sleep, and every ounce of energy I had. I handled clients, managed projects, cleaned up my brother's mistakes, and still somehow got treated like I was the intern who overstayed her welcome. When Mom was alive, she made sure Dad treated me and Mark equally. But after she passed, everything changed. Douglas started calling Mark the future of the company. I became the helper. Meetings that used to include me started happening without me. I'd walk by the conference room and see my brother presenting something I helped design. And now, being told I wasn't invited to the dinner, the one I'd helped organize for years, it felt like a final slap in the face. That night, while they talked about the upcoming dinner, I sat in my office pretending to review reports. The walls felt smaller than usual. I could hear them laughing in the next room, planning menus and seating charts, and my name never came up once. My hands shook on the keyboard, but I didn't say a word. I just kept typing nonsense to hide how angry I was. Mark stopped by my desk before leaving. "Don't take it personally, Lena," he said with that fake grin he always used when he thought he'd won something. "It's just business." Then he walked out, humming. I wanted to throw something at the door after he left, but I didn't. I just sat there, breathing slow, pretending I didn't care. At home, the silence hit harder. My mom's picture sat on the mantel, and I caught myself whispering to her like I used to. "You'd be disappointed, Mom," I said quietly. "They've turned into strangers." I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Just a cold, steady kind of anger. I could have called them out, demanded respect, reminded them that I'd earned my place. But instead, I did nothing. Not because I was weak, but because I knew better than to fight empty-handed. They thought they'd push me out, but they didn't know everything. They didn't know what I still had tucked away, something that would change everything soon enough. So I waited, calm, quiet, smiling when they weren't looking. Because sometimes silence is the sharpest blade you can hold. After Mom passed away, everything in my family started to fall apart. She had been the one who kept us all together, the voice that made Dad listen and made Mark behave. Without her, the balance disappeared. At first, I thought grief had changed us. But it wasn't grief, it was greed. Dad had always told me that Carver Engineering would be split equally between Mark and me. He said it so many times that I believed it without question. "Half yours, half your brother's," he used to say when I stayed late at the office helping him with paperwork. I remember him patting my shoulder, proud that I cared about the family business. I held on to those words for years like they meant something. But after Mom's funeral, Dad changed. He started saying things like, "Mark needs to learn responsibility," and "You should let your brother take the lead." I didn't understand why. I'd been running the finance side of the business since my early 20s, managing clients, keeping contracts in order, keeping us profitable. Mark handled the social side, lunches, handshakes, golf. He was good at charming people, but not much else. Still, Dad began treating him like the heir and me like an employee. The first time I realized something was really wrong was when I found out about a new construction deal signed with a supplier I'd never heard of. The signature line had both my father's and brother's names, but not mine. I was supposed to approve all contracts. That was part of my role. When I confronted Dad about it, he brushed it off. "It's just a small partnership, nothing for you to worry about," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but his eyes didn't meet mine. After that, it became a pattern. Meetings I used to attend suddenly happened without me. I'd walk past the boardroom and see the door closed when it used to be open. When I asked about it, Mark would laugh and say, "Relax, it's just strategy stuff. You wouldn't like it anyway." His tone was playful, but there was something sharp underneath it. One afternoon, I found a stack of new financial reports sitting on the printer in Dad's office. I shouldn't have looked, but something told me to. The numbers didn't make sense. Huge sums of money had been moved to accounts I didn't recognize. I printed copies and took them home, reading through them late into the night. The more I read, the sicker I felt. They were redirecting company funds, signing contracts, moving assets, and locking me out of every decision. The promise of equality had been broken quietly, behind closed doors. They didn't yell or argue. They just erased me from the room. And what hurt most wasn't even the money. It was the betrayal. My father had looked me in the eyes and promised fairness. Now, I saw that his word meant nothing. That night, I realized something I didn't want to admit. They weren't just pushing me out of the company. They were pushing me out of the family. It happened on a quiet Friday afternoon when I stayed late at the office to clean out old files. I wasn't looking for anything important, just trying to keep my mind busy. The filing room smelled like dust and old paper, and the light above me flickered every few seconds. Most of the boxes hadn't been touched in years. I pulled one down and started flipping through folders, old contracts, tax reports, invoices. It was boring work until I found a thin brown envelope with my name on it. I opened it and saw papers I didn't remember signing. The date on top was from 8 years ago, a time when the company had nearly gone bankrupt. I remembered those months clearly. Our biggest client had pulled out, leaving us with piles of unpaid bills and no cash flow. Mark had panicked and disappeared on business trips, while Dad grew quieter every day. Everyone thought we were finished. Back then, I had been the one who found a way to save us. I convinced a bank to give us a bridge loan, but they needed collateral and proof of control. I remember the meeting clearly now. The loan officer said the documents had to show one controlling owner who could guarantee repayment. Dad had looked at me, exhausted, and said, "Fine, make it her. Just get us the money." He signed the papers right there in front of me. At the time, it didn't mean anything beyond that moment. It was supposed to be temporary. Looking at the document now, I realized it was the same one. It showed that 52% of Carver Engineering had been transferred into my name to secure the loan. There was no expiration date, no clause saying it would revert back to him. My heart started to race. My father had forgotten to take it back, and I'd forgotten it even existed. I sat down on the floor with the papers spread out around me. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't stop smiling. After everything, the lies, the meetings behind my back, being banned from the dinner, they had no idea that the company legally belonged to me. I owned the majority. All this time, they'd been trying to push me out of something I controlled completely. The thought made my stomach twist, half from shock, half from satisfaction. It felt unreal. I read the document again and again, tracing my father's signature with my finger. He'd written it in his usual hurried scrawl, not realizing he'd just handed me the power they were now trying to steal. I sat there for a long time, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. I wasn't angry anymore, not exactly. I just felt calm, coldly calm. They had built walls around me, shut me out of every decision. But those walls were made of paper, and the paper was in my hands. The night of the dinner came faster than I expected. The whole office buzzed with excitement all day. Everyone knew about the company's annual dinner. It was the biggest event of the year, where deals were made and reputations polished. Usually I helped plan it. This time, no one asked for my input. I pretended not to care, but deep down, it felt like someone had erased me from my own story. I stayed late that evening, finishing some reports I didn't even need to work on. The building grew quiet as people left, one by one, their laughter echoing down the hall. From my office, I could see into my father's room across the glass wall. He stood in front of the mirror, straightening his tie. Mark was there too, already dressed in his dark blue suit, grinning at his reflection. They looked like a proud father and son heading off to celebrate their empire. And they were, at least that's what they thought. They didn't see me watching from my desk. I kept my lights off so they wouldn't notice. I saw my father raise a glass of whiskey toward Mark. Even through the glass, I could see his lips move. To the future of Carver Engineering. My throat tightened. I used to stand beside them during that toast. Now, they didn't even remember I existed. As they walked out together, laughing, my chest felt heavy, but not weak. Something inside me had shifted since I found those documents. The anger that once burned hot had turned cold, steady. I wasn't just the daughter they dismissed anymore. I was the owner they didn't know they had to answer to. When the office was completely silent, I stood up and went to the window. Across the street, I could see the lights of the hotel where the dinner was being held. Black cars were pulling up, guests stepping out in suits and dresses. The company logo glowed on a banner by the entrance, Carver Engineering, celebrating growth and legacy. The words made me laugh quietly. I went to my desk drawer and pulled out the folder with the documents I had found. My name was printed clearly beside the percentage, 52%. I looked at it one last time, making sure it was real. Then I placed it carefully in my bag. I didn't need an invitation to that dinner. I had something much better. Before leaving, I stopped by the hallway mirror. My reflection looked calm, almost too calm. I fixed my hair, straightened my jacket, and smiled at myself. Let's go remind them who really built this company, I whispered. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. I could hear faint music from the hotel ballroom as I walked toward it. My hands didn't shake. My steps didn't falter. They thought they'd left me behind, but they were about to see I had never been beneath them. I had always been above. The next morning, I met with our company's lawyer, Richard Hall. He had known my family for years and handled most of our legal work. I called him early, asking if we could meet privately. My voice stayed calm, but my heart beat fast the whole drive to his office. I kept wondering if the document I'd found was really as powerful as I thought. Richard's office was quiet, lined with old books and framed certificates. He looked surprised when I walked in alone. "Elena," he said kindly, "I didn't expect to see you. What's this about?" I handed him the folder without saying a word. He opened it, adjusted his glasses, and started reading. The only sounds in the room were the turning of pages and the faint ticking of the wall clock. His calm expression slowly changed as he read further. Then he looked up at me, his brows drawn together. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "In the company archives," I said. "My father signed it 8 years ago. Is it still valid?" He leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment. "Well," he said slowly, "yes, it appears to be. It clearly transfers controlling shares to you, 52% to be exact. And I see no record of reversal or amendment. So legally, Elena, you are the majority owner of Carver Engineering." Hearing those words out loud made everything real. I felt my chest tighten as the weight of it sank in. For years, I had worked under my father and brother, believing they held all the power. But all along, the real control had been mine. Richard studied my face. "Does your father know this?" I shook my head. "He doesn't remember. Or maybe he just forgot. But they've been making deals without me, locking me out of meetings, and now they've banned me from the dinner." He sighed and rubbed his temples. "Then you have to be careful. You have every legal right, but family businesses can get ugly fast when emotions get involved. You can take action, but think before you do. You hold the cards now. Use them wisely." I nodded, but my mind was already racing. Part of me wanted to walk into that dinner and end their little show. Another part wanted to wait, to watch them crumble slowly under their own arrogance. Justice or revenge? I wasn't sure which I wanted more. When I left Richard's office, the world outside looked different. The streets, the cars, the people, everything felt sharper, clearer. I wasn't just a daughter anymore, or an employee. I was the owner of the company they thought they controlled. I stood by my car for a moment, the folder still in my hand. My fingers brushed over my name printed on the document. It wasn't just paper. It was power, quiet, undeniable power. And I finally knew how I was going to use it. The hotel ballroom was glowing with golden lights when I arrived. The sound of laughter and soft music spilled out as the doors opened. A man at the entrance checked the guest list, frowning when I said my name. "I don't see you on here, ma'am," he said politely. I smiled and replied, "That's fine. I'm not here as a guest. I'm here as the owner." His eyebrows shot up, but I walked past him before he could say another word. Inside, everything looked expensive. Polished floors, crystal glasses, waiters moving like clockwork. My father stood near the front, shaking hands with investors. Mark hovered beside him, acting like he owned the place. When they saw me, both of them froze for a second. I could almost hear the air leave the room. Then my father's polite smile returned, tight and forced. "Elena," he said slowly, walking toward me. "This is a private event. You shouldn't be here." His voice was calm, but his eyes told a different story, shock mixed with anger. Mark came up beside him. "Dad, let's not make a scene," he said, then turned to me. "Come on, Lena. Let's step outside, all right?" He reached out to take my arm, but I moved back before he could touch me. "I think I'll stay," I said softly. My voice didn't shake. After all, this company dinner is being paid for by Carver Engineering, and as majority owner, I think I've earned a seat. Whispers started spreading around the room. The investors looked at each other, confused. My father frowned. "Majority owner? Elena, what are you talking about?" I opened my bag and pulled out the folder. "This," I said, placing it on the nearest table. "A legal document signed by you 8 years ago. You transferred 52% of the company to my name. It was never reversed." The color drained from his face. Mark stared at the papers like they were written in another language. One of the investors, Mr. Hanley, stepped forward and looked at the signature. "This looks legitimate," he said quietly. The whispers grew louder. My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, he looked small. I took a slow breath and looked around the room. "I'll be sitting down," I said. I walked past them, every step echoing across the marble floor. The table at the center had a name card that read Mark Carver, Executive Director. I slid it aside and took the seat. No one spoke. The music stopped. All I could hear was the faint clinking of glasses somewhere at the back. My father stood frozen, his hands shaking slightly. Mark looked like he wanted to yell but didn't dare. I lifted a glass of water, smiled faintly, and said, "Please don't stop on my account. It's still a celebration, isn't it?" The room stayed silent. The air turned cold. And for the first time, they finally understood who really held the power at that table. The dinner continued, but the warmth and laughter from earlier were gone. The waiters still served food, but the room had turned cold and heavy. My father sat stiffly at the head of the table, his usual confident smile replaced by a tight, nervous one. Mark kept glancing around, pretending nothing was wrong, but I could see the panic building in his eyes. The investors whispered to one another, passing looks toward me and then back to my father. Finally, one of them, Mr. Hanley, cleared his throat. "Douglas," he said, "we've been hearing some strange things lately. Are the rumors about the construction contracts true?" My father's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Rumors," he repeated. "What rumors?" Before he could finish, I spoke. "They're not rumors," I said. Every eye in the room turned toward me. The contracts were signed without full board approval and without proper reporting of expenses. Some of the funds were redirected to side accounts that don't appear in the official books. My father's hand trembled slightly. "Elena, you're mistaken." "No, I'm not," I interrupted. "I've seen the financials myself. You and Mark approved deals that benefited your personal accounts while cutting employee salaries to cover the losses. You even created fake consultant roles to move money quietly." The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner. One of the investors, a tall woman named Mrs. Brooks, looked sharply at Mark. "Is that true?" she asked. Mark stammered. "Of course not. She's twisting things." I slid another paper from my folder. "Then maybe you can explain this," I said, placing a printed bank statement on the table. "Transfers from company funds to an account under your name, disguised as supplier payments." Mark's face turned red. My father tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Elena, you don't understand how business works." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said quietly. "You've been trying to push me out for months. You cut my salary, took me off projects, and called it restructuring. You held meetings without me and told everyone I wasn't part of leadership anymore. But now they all know who really owns this company." The investors looked shocked, whispering among themselves. My father looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. The man who once told me I was his pride now stared at me like I was a stranger. Mr. Hanley finally spoke again. "Douglas, this is serious. We trusted your leadership." My father had no answer. Mark looked down, his hands clenched into fists. I leaned back in my chair, calm and steady. "All I wanted was honesty," I said. "You could have treated me like family. Instead, you treated me like a threat." No one touched their food after that. The silence said more than any words could. What they had tried to hide for years was now out in the open, and there was no taking it back. The tension in the room grew so thick it was hard to breathe. My father sat at the head of the table, pale and furious. Mark kept fidgeting, his jaw tight, his eyes darting around like he was searching for a way out. The investors stayed quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. I knew this was the moment everything would change. I stood up slowly, feeling every heartbeat in my chest. "Since we're all here," I said, "I'd like to call for a board vote." My voice was calm but firm. "It's time to review the company's leadership." My father slammed his hand against the table. "You don't have the right to do that," he snapped. I looked directly at him. "Actually, I do," I said, pulling out the legal document once more. "As majority shareholder, I hold 52% of Carver Engineering. According to company policy, I can call a vote at any time, and my vote alone decides the outcome." The room went silent. You could hear the clink of a glass somewhere at the back, then nothing else. My father's face turned red. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're making a fool of yourself in front of everyone." Mark jumped in, his voice shaking. Elena, come on. Don't do this. We can fix this privately. I didn't even look at him. There's nothing to fix, I said. This company has been mismanaged for too long. I'm officially calling for a leadership restructuring. Mr. Hanley cleared his throat. And what does that mean exactly? It means, I said slowly, that Douglas Carver and Mark Carver are hereby removed from all executive authority, effective immediately. Gasps filled the room. My father stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You can't remove me from my own company, he shouted. I met his glare without flinching. You gave me this power years ago, remember? You signed it away when you needed saving. You forgot what you did, but the paper didn't. For a moment, he looked like he might explode, but then something inside him broke. His anger melted into disbelief. He sank back into his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table. You wouldn't, he whispered. I just did, I said quietly. Mark turned to the investors, desperate. You can't let her do this. You know my father built this place. Mr. Hanley shook his head slowly. The documents are clear, he said. It's legal. No one spoke after that. The entire room seemed frozen in time. My father looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe he didn't. The little girl who once followed him around the office was gone. I gathered my papers and stood tall. The vote is complete, I said. Carver Engineering has new leadership. Then I walked toward the exit, leaving them sitting in silence, defeated by their own mistakes. The next morning, I drove to the office earlier than usual. The building looked the same from the outside, but as I walked through the glass doors, it felt completely different. The same walls that once felt cold and unwelcoming now seemed quiet, almost watchful. People looked up from their desks when I passed. Some smiled politely, others whispered to each other. I could see the question in their eyes. Was it true? Was I really the new boss? I nodded to the receptionist, who gave me a nervous smile. Good morning, Ms. Carver, she said softly. It was the first time anyone had called me that. The words felt strange, heavy. I forced a small smile and walked toward my office, my father's old office now. The nameplate on the door still read Douglas Carver, CEO. I stopped and stared at it for a long moment before walking in. The smell of his cologne still lingered in the room. His papers were gone, but the ghost of his presence wasn't. I sat behind the desk, the same desk where he had once dismissed my ideas without listening. The chair creaked softly as I leaned back, looking around. I should have felt proud. Instead, I just felt tired. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Mark. I'm sorry, Lena. I didn't mean for things to go this far. I stared at the screen, reading the words again and again. For a moment, I thought about replying, but what was there to say? Sorry couldn't undo what they'd done. It couldn't erase the years they made me feel invisible. I locked my phone and set it face down. Outside my office, employees were starting their day. I could hear phones ringing, the hum of printers, the shuffle of papers. It was the same rhythm I'd always known, but now it felt quieter, more cautious. People walked by my office door, peeking in just long enough to see if I looked different. I didn't blame them. Overnight, everything had changed. By noon, I finally went downstairs to the workshop floor, the heart of the company. The engineers and project managers greeted me with respectful nods. Some even clapped softly. These were the people I'd worked alongside for years, the ones who saw how hard I fought to keep the business running. Their support meant more than they realized. But even with their smiles, something inside me felt hollow. I had won, yes. I had taken back what was rightfully mine. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing in the ashes of something that used to matter. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. My father's car wasn't there. He hadn't come in. Maybe he never would again. For the first time, I realized that revenge doesn't heal. It only ends things. And some endings, no matter how justified, still hurt. I opened the top drawer of my new desk and found a thin layer of dust on everything. It reminded me of how long this office had belonged to someone else. My father had spent decades sitting here, running the company his way. Now it was mine, and the silence in the room felt almost too big. The morning light came through the blinds, cutting across the desk in soft lines. For a moment, I just stood there, not sure where to begin. Then I remembered something. I went to my old office upstairs, the one I'd worked in for years. On the shelf was a small framed photo of my mother. She was smiling, holding a cup of coffee, sunlight catching her hair. I had kept it there since the day she passed. When I picked it up, I felt the familiar ache in my chest, that mix of missing her and wishing she could see me now. I brought the photo back to my new office and set it right in the middle of the desk. It looked simple there, but somehow it made the space feel warmer. I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame and whispered quietly, "I did it, Mom." My voice broke a little, but it doesn't feel the way I thought it would. The truth was I had everything now, the title, the power, the respect. But power didn't fix the emptiness that came with betrayal. My father hadn't spoken to me since that night. Mark hadn't come back to the office. The family I'd grown up with was gone, replaced by silence and distance. I'd wanted justice, but justice had a price I hadn't expected. I turned my chair toward the window and looked down at the workers arriving for their shifts. They were the ones who had kept this company alive, the ones who believed in the work more than the politics. Watching them, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet determination. I couldn't change the past, but I could change what came next. My mother used to say, "A business should build people, not break them." I hadn't understood that when I was younger, but now I did. I wanted Carver Engineering to be something she would have been proud of, honest, fair, and human. Not ruled by ego or greed, but by purpose. I opened a clean notebook and started writing new goals. Better safety rules. More chances for younger engineers to grow. Equal treatment for everyone. As the pen moved across the page, I felt the weight on my shoulders start to lift, just a little. I looked once more at my mother's photo. "I'm going to rebuild it," I said softly. "Not for them, not for revenge, but for you." The sunlight grew brighter, falling across her smiling face. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not victory, not pride, just quiet peace. It was the start of something new.